Where is everything you know about the Tree of Knowledge based? You would tell me it's based on the English translation. But in this video, you will understand exactly what the Tree of Knowledge is, why it made man desire clothing, and how it actually worked. The Tree of Knowledge of Good and Evil, we've all heard the story. Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, the forbidden fruit, the fall of mankind. But what if the traditional interpretation misses the profound truth hidden within the original Hebrew text? Today, we're going to uncover a secret that changes everything we thought we knew about this pivotal moment in biblical history. The Tree of Knowledge wasn't simply about knowing right from wrong. It was about something far more essential to human nature, something that transformed innocent beings into creatures of mystery and paradox. When Adam and Eve ate the forbidden fruit, what exactly happened to them? What knowledge did they gain that was so dangerous that God exiled them from paradise? And why, after thousands of years of biblical scholarship, has this insight remained hidden in plain sight? The answer lies in the original Hebrew text, in words that have been mistranslated and misunderstood for generations. Through careful analysis, I'm going to reveal to you that the Tree of Knowledge introduced 4 fundamental traits into human consciousness: selfishness, greed, envy, and the desire for success at any cost. These traits, these aspects of human nature that we all struggle with, weren't part of the original design. They were the forbidden knowledge. Think about it. Before eating the fruit, Adam and Eve walked naked without shame. They lived in perfect harmony with creation. They wanted for nothing, but afterward, they suddenly felt ashamed. They covered themselves. They hid from God. They blamed others for their actions. What changed within them? The traditional explanation that they simply learned to distinguish good from evil doesn't fully explain this transformation. It doesn't answer why the first thing they did was cover their bodies. It doesn't explain why God considered this knowledge so dangerous. But by examining the precise Hebrew words used in Genesis, I'll show you exactly what the Tree of Knowledge really did, and why its effects continue to shape human behavior to this day. This isn't speculation or interpretation. This is linguistic analysis of the original text, revealing layers of meaning that have been obscured by translation. What did the Tree of Knowledge of Good and Evil really do to humanity? Why did it make Adam and Eve suddenly ashamed of their bodies? How can good intentions lead to evil actions? The answers to these questions will transform your understanding not just of this biblical story, but of human nature itself. Let's start at the very beginning, in the Garden of Eden, before exploring the Hebrew text that holds these hidden revelations. The Bible, in the very beginning. Genesis tells us that God created a perfect garden in Eden. In this garden, he placed the first humans, Adam and Eve. They lived in a state of complete innocence and harmony with nature. The Bible describes this garden as filled with beautiful trees that were good for food. But in the middle of the garden stood 2 special trees, the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. God gave Adam clear instructions about these trees. Genesis chapter 2, verse 16 and 17 says, "And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, You may surely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it you shall surely die." This command was simple. Everything in the garden was available to them, except this one tree. Then the serpent enters the story. It approaches Eve and questions God's command. Did God actually say, "You shall not eat off any tree in the garden"? Eve corrects the serpent, explaining that they may eat from any tree except the tree of knowledge, which they must not even touch, or they will die. And then comes the serpent's famous reply, "You will not surely die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." This is where traditional interpretations usually focus. For millenniums, religious teachers have told us that the tree of knowledge simply gave Adam and Eve moral awareness, the ability to tell right from wrong. Some say it gave them free will. Others say it made them aware of their mortality. Many suggest it represents sexual knowledge. But these explanations don't fully match. what happens next in the story. After Adam and Eve eat the fruit, their first reaction isn't to do something evil. It isn't to rebel against God directly. It isn't even to seek more knowledge. Their first reaction is to cover their naked bodies. They suddenly feel ashamed. They hide from God. They blame others. Something more specific has changed within them, something that goes beyond simply knowing right from wrong. The traditional interpretations miss something crucial about human psychology. They don't explain why knowing good and evil would make someone feel ashamed of their own body. They don't tell us why this knowledge was so dangerous that it required exile from paradise. To understand what really happened, we need to look at the actual Hebrew words used in Genesis 3:6, the moment when Eve decides to eat the fruit. What did Eve actually see in that fruit, and what did it really do to the human mind? Now let's look at the exact moment Eve decided to eat the fruit. Genesis 3:6 in the King James Bible says, "And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof, and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat." This verse describes three things Eve noticed about the tree. It was good for food. It was pleasant to the eyes. It was desired to make one wise. But what if these translations don't capture what the original Hebrew actually says? Here's the original Hebrew for pleasant to the eyes, veki ta'avahu la'enayim. The key word here is ta'ava. The King James translators chose to render this as pleasant, but is that really what it means? To understand a Hebrew word, we need to see how it's used elsewhere in the Bible. This gives us context for its true meaning. The root of ta'ava appears in one other important place in the first 5 books of the Bible. In the book of Numbers, chapter 11, verse 4, we read, "Ve'ha'asaf suf asher bekir bo hit avu ta'ava." This is translated in the King James Bible as, "And the mixed multitude that was among them fell a-lusting." Other translations render it as, "And the rabble that was among them had greedy desires," not pleasantness, not beauty, but craving, lust, longing, greed and desire. So if we apply this meaning to what Eve saw, the verse would actually say, "And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food and that it made the eyes desirous," this changes everything. The fruit wasn't just visually appealing. It stirred something new in Eve. The feelings of longing, craving, greed and lust. A hungry desire to possess something just because they wanted it. Think about what greed does to a person. Before the fruit, Adam and Eve were content with everything they had. They lived in a state of perfect satisfaction. They wanted for nothing. But greed creates a different mindset. Suddenly, you can have everything you need and still want more. You can be surrounded by abundance and still feel like something is missing. Haven't we all felt this? The nagging desire for something we don't really need? The way our eyes linger on shiny new things? The urge to acquire more and more? This is what happened to Eve in that moment. For the first time, she experienced the feeling of "I want that," not because she needed it, but just because it caught her eye. The fruit awakened greed, the endless wanting that never feels satisfied. And this was just the first change the fruit would bring to human nature, just the first way the tree of knowledge would transform how humans see the world. But there's more. Let's look at the next phrase in Genesis 3:6, a tree to be desired. We've already uncovered that the fruit made Eve's eyes greedy rather than simply appearing pleasant. Now let's look at the next phrase, and a tree to be desired to make one wise. Here's the original Hebrew for this phrase, ve nechmad ha'etz lehazkil. The key word here is nechmad. The King James translators rendered this as desired. But is that what the Hebrew really means? Let's find out how this word is used elsewhere in the Bible, and this is where things get really interesting. After the Garden of Eden story, this same Hebrew root appears 5 more times in the Torah, and in all 5 cases it means something far stronger than just desire. The most famous appearance is in the 10 Commandments themselves. In Exodus 20, the 10th commandment states, Lo takmod beit re'echa, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house. The same root word. Not simply desire, but covet. Envy, jealousy. Every single time this word appears after Eden, it refers to an unhealthy, grasping kind of desire. The kind of desire that wants what others have. The kind that looks at your neighbor's possessions and thinks, I should have that instead of them. So if we apply this meaning to what Eve saw, the verse would actually say, and when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it made the eyes greedy and a tree to be envied to make one, this reveals the second major change the fruit brought to human nature, envy and jealousy. Let's think about what envy does to a person. Before eating the fruit, Adam and Eve never compared themselves to others. They didn't look at what they had and measure it against what someone else possessed. They didn't feel the sting of jealousy or the burn of covetousness. But envy changes everything about how we see ourselves and others. Envy makes us constantly compare. It makes us measure our worth against others. It creates a feeling of lack, that what we have isn't enough because someone else has something different or better. This is exactly what happened to Adam and Eve after eating the fruit. Suddenly they became aware of their nakedness, but why? They were naked before, and it never bothered them. The difference is that now they could compare. Now they could feel inadequate. Now they could look at themselves and think, something is missing, something is wrong with me. This explains one of the great mysteries of the story, why their first reaction was to cover themselves with fig leaves. It wasn't moral awareness that made them ashamed of their bodies. It was the new feeling of inadequacy that comes from envy and comparison. In particular, it was a sense of physical inadequacy. Modern psychology has explained that the root cause of envy is a feeling of inadequacy or dissatisfaction with one's own self. Physical inadequacy is a person's perception of their own appearance as not meeting certain standards, leading to feelings of being less than or inferior. Psychologists like Dr. Leon Festinger, who developed social comparison theory, shows that humans have a natural drive to compare their traits, abilities, and opinions to others. When we find ourselves lacking in these comparisons, we experience shame and try to hide what we perceive as deficiencies. This is exactly what happened to Adam and Eve. Suddenly aware of their physical selves in comparison to some imagined ideal, they experienced the very first case of body shame in human history. Envy made them see themselves as lacking, as not enough, as needing to cover up and hide. And this is still with us today, isn't it? The constant comparison, the feeling that we're not enough, the endless measuring of ourselves against others. This is the second gift of the tree of knowledge, the bitter fruit of jealousy and envy that makes us forever dissatisfied with ourselves. But there's still one more piece to uncover. Let's look at the final phrase, to make one wise. We've uncovered two traits the tree of knowledge introduced to humanity, greed and envy. Now let's examine the final phrase in Genesis 3, verse 6. The part that's traditionally translated as to make one wise, here's the Hebrew lehazkil. The key root word here is sakal. The King James translators rendered this as to make one wise. But once again we need to ask, is wisdom really what this Hebrew word means? To answer this question, we need to look at how this word is used elsewhere in the Hebrew Bible. The root shakal appears 3 other times in the Torah, and its meaning might surprise you. In Deuteronomy 29, verse 8 or 9, in some translations we find, Chushmatem et divrei habrit hazot va'asitem otam lema'an taskilu et kol asher ta'asun. This is translated in the King James Bible as keep therefore the words of this covenant and do them, that ye may prosper in all that ye do. Prosper, not become wise, but prosper, succeed, get ahead. Looking at other instances where this root appears, we find similar meanings: to prosper, to be successful, to act cleverly, or to gain an advantage. So if we apply this meaning to what Eve saw, the verse would actually say, and when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it made the eyes greedy, and a tree to be envied to make one successful. This reveals the third major change the fruit brought to human nature. The driving desire for success and prosperity, even at a cost. Think about what the desire for success does to a person. Before eating the fruit, Adam and Eve had no concept of getting ahead or being successful. They weren't trying to achieve anything or improve their status. They simply existed in perfect harmony with their environment. But the desire for success changes a person's entire outlook. When you're driven by the need to succeed, you start to see everything as a means to an end. You begin to calculate, to strategize, to weigh costs and benefits. You become willing to sacrifice things, even good things, for the sake of advancement. This is what happened to Adam and Eve. They gained the ability to see the fruit as a tool for advancement. The serpent promised them they would be like God, and suddenly they could imagine a better position for themselves. They could envision success and status beyond their current state. And isn't this drive for success still one of the most powerful forces in human behavior today? The constant push to achieve more, to be better, to climb higher. Even when we're already in a good place, the relentless pursuit of success can be positive when it drives innovation and improvement. But it can also lead us to sacrifice what matters most: relationships, health, ethical principles on the altar of achievement. So now we've uncovered the 3 traits the tree of knowledge actually gave to humanity: greed, the insatiable desire for more; envy, the painful awareness of what others have that we don't; the drive for success, the restless push to improve our position. Together, these 3 traits transformed innocent beings into creatures of endless wanting. Let's put it all together and see what the verse actually means when properly translated. Now that we've examined each key phrase in Genesis 3 verse 6, let's put it all together and see what the verse actually says. When accurately translated from the Hebrew, "And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it made the eyes greedy, and a tree to be envied to make one successful, she took of the fruit thereof, and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat." This reveals something profound about the tree of knowledge. It didn't simply give Adam and Eve awareness of right and wrong. It systematically changed their psychology by introducing 4 interconnected traits: selfishness, putting one's own desires above everything else; greed, the insatiable desire for more, even when needs are met; envy, the painful awareness of what others have that we don't; desire for success, the relentless drive to improve one's position. You'll notice that these traits aren't inherently evil on their own. In fact, they can appear quite positive at first glance. Self-interest helps us survive. Desire for more can drive innovation. Comparison with others can inspire improvement. Ambition can lead to great achievements. But these traits have a darker side when combined. Psychologists refer to this phenomenon as the hedonic treadmill, the tendency to quickly return to a baseline level of satisfaction after getting what we want, then immediately begin craving something new. These traits from the tree of knowledge put humanity on an endless treadmill of wanting. When Eve saw the fruit, she experienced for the first time, "I want that." Greed. It would make me better than I am now. Envy. It will help me get ahead. Desire for success. And underneath it all was the most transformative change: selfishness. The ability to put her own desires above everything else, even God's clear command. These traits, working together, turned innocent beings who lived in perfect harmony with their world into creatures of endless wanting, forever seeking what they don't have, forever comparing themselves to others, forever striving for more. And this explains why the fruit was forbidden. Not because knowledge itself is bad, but because these particular psychological traits would forever change humanity's relationship with God, with each other, and with themselves. Now we can finally answer one of the most puzzling aspects of the Garden of Eden story. Why did Adam and Eve suddenly need clothing? Genesis chapter 3 verse 7 tells us, "Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves." Before eating the fruit, they were naked and unashamed. After eating, they immediately felt the need to cover themselves. Why? The traditional explanation is that they felt moral shame about their bodies. But think about it. Why would knowing right from wrong make you ashamed of your natural state? The answer lies in the psychological traits we've discovered. particularly envy and the self-consciousness it creates. Developmental psychologists tell us that young children are naturally unself-conscious about their bodies, much like Adam and Eve before the fruit. It's only when we develop self-awareness and the ability to compare ourselves to others that body shame emerges. The fruit gave Adam and Eve the ability to look at themselves objectively, imagine an ideal they should meet, and feel inadequate when they didn't meet that ideal. Psychologist Dr. Brené Brown, who studies shame and vulnerability, explains that physical shame comes from the painful gap between how we think we should look and how we perceive ourselves. Before the fruit, Adam and Eve had no concept of should. They simply were. But envy creates a should. It makes us look at ourselves and find ourselves lacking. This is exactly what happened in the garden. The fruit gave them self-consciousness, the awareness of self as an object that can be judged, compared and found wanting. Suddenly, they saw their own bodies through eyes of comparison. They experienced physical inadequacy, the feeling that their natural state wasn't good enough. And their immediate response was to hide, to cover, to conceal what they now perceived as deficient. This explains why clothing was their first priority, even before dealing with God's anger or their expulsion from the garden. The psychological pain of feeling physically inadequate was that immediate and that intense. And this same pattern of physical inadequacy still drives human behavior today. The multi-billion-dollar beauty, fashion and fitness industries all thrive on our inherited sense of physical inadequacy. Social media intensifies it by constantly exposing us to idealized images for comparison. The need to hide our perceived inadequacies to present an improved, curated version of ourselves to the world began with that first bite of fruit and continues to shape human psychology to this day. But there's more to understand about how the tree of knowledge transformed humanity. Next, let's explore how these new traits explain something even more confusing: how good can lead to evil. We now come to one of the deepest mysteries of the tree of knowledge, how it enabled good to lead to evil. Remember what the tree was called in Hebrew, Etz Hada'at Tovara, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But what does this connection between good and evil actually mean? Our new understanding of Genesis chapter 3, verse 6 gives us the answer. Notice the first thing Eve observed. The tree was good for food. She began with good intentions, seeing something beneficial. But then came the traits we've identified. It made her eyes greedy. It was to be envied. It promised success. This pattern, starting with something good but then adding selfishness, greed, envy and ambition, explains exactly how good can transform into evil. Think about it. Many of history's greatest atrocities began with seemingly good intentions, creating a better society, helping one's nation prosper, protecting one's family or group, advancing human knowledge. But when these good intentions become corrupted by selfishness, greed, envy and ruthless ambition, they lead directly to harm. The Bible itself gives us the solution to this problem. In Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18, we find the principle, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself." Rabbi Akiva, one of Judaism's greatest sages, said this commandment is the foundation of the entire Torah. This is the foundation of Judeo-Christian values. This principle is the antidote to the tree of knowledge's effects. It acknowledges self-interest but balances it with equal concern for others. Psychologists call this healthy empathy, the ability to care about others as much as we care about ourselves. Studies in moral psychology show that empathy is the key factor that prevents good intentions from becoming harmful actions. When we lack empathy, when we care only about our own benefit, our own advancement, our own success, even our good intentions become dangerous. Let me show you how this works. Without the tree of knowledge traits, a good intention stays good. This food is good. I will share this good food with others. But with the tree of knowledge traits, good intentions transform. This food is good, plus selfishness, greed, envy, ambition. I will take this good food for myself, even if it harms others. And this explains the true meaning of knowledge of good and evil. It's not simply moral awareness. It's understanding how good intentions can become evil through the corrupting influence of selfishness. Modern psychology confirms this insight. Researchers studying moral decision-making have found that people rarely choose options they recognize as purely evil. Instead, they justify harmful actions by focusing on a good intention or outcome while ignoring the harm they cause. This self-serving bias, the ability to see the good in our actions while minimizing the bad, is exactly what the tree of knowledge of good and evil enabled. Before eating the fruit, Adam and Eve couldn't harm others while believing they were doing good. After eating, they gained the psychological capacity to prioritize their own benefit while ignoring harm to others, all while still seeing themselves as good. This is the most dangerous knowledge of all, the ability to do wrong while believing you're right. And this explains why humanity needed to leave the Garden of Eden. One question remains: why did God exile Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden? The traditional view suggests it was punishment for disobedience, but our deeper understanding of the tree of knowledge of good and evil reveals something more nuanced. To understand this, we need to look at the only other place in the Torah where the phrase good and bad is used together in a similar way. In Deuteronomy chapter 20, verse 9, we find V'tapkem asher amartem lavaz yihiyeh uvnechem asher lo yadeu hayom tovara hima yavo ushama velahem etenenna vehem yirashuha. The King James Bible translates this as, "And the little ones that you said would be taken captive, your children who do not yet know good from bad, they will enter the land. I will give it to them, and they will take possession of it." Look at how knowledge of good and evil is used here to describe children. Those who don't know good and evil are described as little ones, as children. This gives us a powerful metaphor for understanding what happened in Eden. Before eating from the tree, Adam and Eve were like children, innocent, trusting, living in the present moment without the burdens of comparison, ambition, or endless wanting. After eating the fruit, they were no longer children. They had grown up. Developmental psychologists recognize a similar pattern in human growth. Young children live in a state of natural trust and presence, without the complex psychological burdens that come with maturity. As they grow, they develop self-consciousness, comparison, and ambition, the very traits we've identified from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Eden was a perfect environment for childlike beings who lived in perfect trust and harmony. But it was not designed for beings with selfishness, greed, envy, and ambition. These new traits made Eden untenable. Just as children eventually must leave their parents' home and face the world, Adam and Eve needed to leave the garden. But there was another, more urgent reason for their exile. Genesis chapter 3, verse 22 tells us, "And the Lord God said, 'The man has now become like one of us, knowing good and evil. He must not be allowed to reach out his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat and live forever.'" Think about what this means. If Adam and Eve had eaten from the tree of life after gaining these traits from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, they would have become immortal beings driven by endless want, comparison, and ambition. Beings who would never be satisfied, never find peace, yet would live forever. The exile wasn't just punishment, it was protection for humanity and for creation itself. These new psychological traits needed to be contained within mortal lives. Death became the necessary boundary for beings who would otherwise want without end. So the story of Eden isn't simply about a fall from grace, it's about a necessary transition from innocent childhood to complex maturity with all the beauty and burden that brings. And these traits are still with us today, shaping our psychology, our societies, and our relationship with the world around us. The music of life continues, echoing through the ages, reminding us of our journey from innocence to maturity. And as we listen, we find the true meaning of our existence, intertwined with the melodies of our past and future. We've done a deep exploration into the original Hebrew text of Genesis to uncover what the tree of knowledge truly gave to humanity. Not simply moral awareness, but 4 psychological traits that fundamentally changed human nature: selfishness, putting our own desires above everything else. Greed, the insatiable desire for more, even when we have enough. Envy, the painful awareness of what others have that we don't. Desire for success, the relentless drive to improve our position. These traits completely changed innocent beings into creatures of complexity and contradiction. They explain why Adam and Eve suddenly needed clothing, why good intentions can lead to harmful actions, and why they needed to leave the Garden of Eden. But this ancient story isn't just about the past. It speaks directly to our modern experience. Look around at our world today. So many of our modern challenges stem directly from these four traits. Our consumer culture thrives on never-ending want. Social media amplifies comparison and feelings of inadequacy. The relentless pursuit of success drives burnout and disconnection. Our sense of never having enough fuels environmental destruction. The traits from the tree of knowledge are at the heart of both our greatest achievements and our deepest struggles. Psychologists today recognize these patterns. They give them different names: hedonic adaptation, social comparison, achievement orientation, self-serving bias. But they're studying the same human tendencies described in this ancient Hebrew text. Yet understanding these traits gives us power over them. When we recognize the voice of endless wanting, of painful comparison, of ruthless ambition within ourselves, we can make different choices. We can return to the wisdom found in Leviticus. Love your neighbor as yourself, the balance that keeps good from becoming evil. Perhaps this is the most valuable insight from our exploration. The Tree of Knowledge story isn't about how humanity fell from perfection. It's about how we gained the complex psychology that makes us uniquely human, capable of both tremendous good and terrible harm. And it reminds us that with this knowledge comes responsibility. We must manage these traits rather than being ruled by them. The next time you feel inadequate about your appearance, catch yourself wanting something you don't need, compare yourself unfavorably to others, or push yourself relentlessly towards success, remember this story. These feelings aren't moral failings. They're the ancient inheritance from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. They're part of being human. But they don't have to control us. Understanding their origin and their power gives us the chance to choose a different path. The fruit has been eaten. The knowledge is ours, but how we use it, that choice remains with each of us. If you found this exploration of the Tree of Knowledge enlightening, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Has this changed how you understand this ancient story, and what other biblical passages would you like me to analyze in future videos? Please let us know in your comments below.